Hello friends. I can see 90% of my viewers don't subscribe while watching videos. Please hit the subscribe button and like this video. Press that bell icon for notifications. And tell me in the comments which cities you are watching from. Your support means everything to me. Now let's start with today's story. My name is Selene Hartmann, and this is the story of how my own family's betrayal became the fuel for the greatest revenge in corporate history. The salty air of the harbor filled my lungs as I stood on the dock that morning, watching the massive cargo ships bearing our family name glide through the dark waters. The Hartmann name had been etched on the side of our shipping company for 3 generations, each letter representing decades of sweat, sacrifice, and unwavering determination. I was 33 years old, the first daughter to ever step into the boardroom of Hartmann Shipping, armed with a degree in international trade, and fire burning so fiercely in my veins that it could have powered every ship in our fleet. But as I would soon discover, none of that mattered to the men who controlled my family's destiny. The morning sun cast long shadows across the conference room as I entered what I believed would be just another routine board meeting. My uncles, Magnus and Victor Hartmann, sat at the mahogany table like 2 stone gargoyles, their faces already set in expressions of cold disapproval. The other board members, all men who had grown fat and comfortable on my grandfather's legacy, avoided my eyes as I took my seat. "Selene," Magnus began, his voice dripping with condescension that made my skin crawl. "We need to discuss your position within the company." I straightened in my chair, every instinct screaming that something terrible was about to unfold. "What about my position? I have brought in more new accounts in the past year than anyone else on this board." Victor let out a harsh laugh that echoed off the walls like breaking glass. "That is exactly the problem, niece. You are too emotional. You take unnecessary risks. You make decisions based on feelings rather than facts." The words hit me like physical blows, each syllable designed to cut deeper than the last. Emotional? I have increased our revenue by 23%. I have secured partnerships that none of you could even dream of landing. "Dreams," Magnus sneered, leaning back in his leather chair. "That is all they are, Selene. Dreams and fantasies. You should focus on marriage, not mergers. Find yourself a good husband, and leave the business to those who actually understand it." The laughter that erupted from around the table was like acid poured directly into my wounds. These men, these pathetic excuses for leaders who had been riding on my grandfather's coattails for decades, were dismissing everything I had worked for, everything I had achieved. "You cannot be serious," I whispered, my voice barely controlled. "Grandfather promised me that I would inherit this company. He told me that the Hartmann legacy would be mine to carry forward." "Your grandfather said many things before he died," Victor replied with chilling indifference. "But he is not here now, and we are. And we have made a decision." The room fell silent except for the sound of my heart hammering against my ribs. I could feel the weight of their stares, the smugness radiating from every face around that table. Magnus cleared his throat and delivered the words that would change my life forever. "The board has voted unanimously to remove you from all operational duties within Hartmann Shipping, effective immediately." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "Remove me? This is my family's company. This is my birthright." "Your birthright?" Victor laughed again, the sound more vicious than before. "You are a woman, Selene. Women do not run shipping empires. They decorate homes and raise children. That is the natural order of things." I stood up so quickly that my chair crashed backward onto the floor. "The natural order? I have brought innovation to this company that you never could have imagined. I have connections across 6 continents. I speak 4 languages and understand international maritime law better than anyone in this room." "And yet," Magnus said with a cruel smile, "here we are voting you out." The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that for a moment I could not breathe. These were not just business partners or competitors. These were my family members, men who had sat at my childhood dinner table, who had watched me grow up with dreams of following in my grandfather's footsteps. "This is not over," I said, my voice steady despite the hurricane of emotions raging inside me. "Oh, but it is," Victor replied. "Security will escort you out. You have 30 minutes to collect your personal belongings." "And Selene?" He paused, savoring the moment. Do not think about starting your own company. We have connections throughout this industry. No one will work with you. As I walked through the corridors of the building that had been my second home for nearly a decade, past offices where I had spent countless hours building relationships and crafting strategies, I felt something inside me crystallize into diamond-hard resolve. They thought they had destroyed me. They thought they had crushed my spirit and broken my dreams. But what they had actually done was far more dangerous. They had unleashed something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. I walked out with nothing but my laptop, my savings, and my pride burning like gasoline waiting for a match. That night, I stood alone on my apartment balcony, staring out at the harbor lights that twinkled like fallen stars on the dark water. The ships moved slowly through the channels, carrying goods and dreams to destinations around the world. Somewhere out there, Hartmann vessels were following routes that I had helped to establish, serving clients that I had personally secured. But they belonged to Magnus and Victor now. They belonged to men who thought that gender determined capability, that tradition mattered more than innovation, that crushing family members was just another business decision. That was when I made the decision that would define the rest of my life. If they thought I was too weak to run the Hartmann empire, I would build one so vast and powerful that it would eclipse theirs completely. I started small, but I started smart. Independent logistics contracts that the big companies would not touch. Overnight deliveries they said could not be done. Rush shipments to remote locations that required creative solutions and relentless determination. My first office was a converted storage unit in an industrial district that smelled like diesel fuel and broken dreams. But it was mine. Every decision, every risk, every success or failure belonged to me alone. I hired people that Magnus and Victor had overlooked or dismissed. Women who had been told they were not tough enough for the shipping industry. Immigrants who spoke multiple languages and understood global markets in ways that entitled board members never could. Outsiders who knew the grind as intimately as I did, who had something to prove and everything to lose. We did not just move goods. We moved fast, we moved smart, and soon we began to move the future itself. Kira Nakamura became my operations manager, a brilliant Japanese-American woman who had been passed over for promotion at 3 different shipping companies because she was too aggressive. Her aggressive nature turned out to be exactly what we needed to streamline our processes and eliminate inefficiencies that had plagued the industry for decades. Dmitry Volkov, a Russian engineer who had immigrated to America with nothing but his technical expertise and an unbreakable work ethic, revolutionized our loading and unloading procedures. The big companies had ignored him because of his accent and his unconventional ideas. Those unconventional ideas cut our port times by 40%. Isabella Rodriguez brought connections throughout Latin America that opened markets none of the established shipping companies had ever successfully penetrated. She had been told by a recruiter at Hartmann Shipping that they were not ready for diversity hires. Their loss became our incredible gain. Within 18 months, my company, Atlas Global, was handling contracts that Hartmann Shipping had deemed too small or too complicated to pursue. But small contracts added up, and complicated problems required innovative solutions that set us apart from our competition. I worked 18-hour days, 7 days a week. I learned the name of every employee, the details of every contract, the specifications of every shipment. While Magnus and Victor sat in their comfortable offices, making decisions based on quarterly reports and market projections, I was on the docks at 4 in the morning, ensuring that our promises were kept and our reputation was earned through sweat and dedication. Year 2 brought our first major breakthrough. A technology startup needed to ship prototype equipment to 14 countries simultaneously for a global product launch. The timeline was impossible, the logistics were nightmarish, and the penalties for failure were catastrophic. Hartmann Shipping had refused the contract immediately. Too risky, too complicated, too likely to end in disaster and lawsuits. I saw it as the opportunity that would define our company's future. We pulled off that shipment with 6 hours to spare, and the client's product launch was a massive success. Word spread through the technology industry faster than wildfire. Atlas Global was the company that said yes when everyone else said no. We were the team that delivered when delivery seemed impossible. By year 3, We were no longer taking the contracts that other companies did not want. We were competing directly for the contracts that everyone wanted. And we were winning. The first time I saw one of Hartmann Shipping's longtime clients walk into my office, I knew that the tide had not just turned. It had become a tsunami that was about to wash away everything Magnus and Victor thought they had built. Harrison Chun had been shipping with Hartmann for 15 years. His electronics importing business had grown from a small family operation to a multinational corporation, and Hartmann Shipping had handled his logistics every step of the way. But sitting across from me in my office, which now occupied an entire floor of a gleaming downtown tower, he looked frustrated and tired. "Selene," he said, shaking his head slowly, "I cannot continue working with your uncles. Their service has become complacent. Their prices have increased every year, and they treat my business like they are doing me a favor instead of providing a service I pay handsomely for." I leaned forward, listening carefully to every word. This was not just about landing a new client. This was about justice beginning to manifest in the marketplace. "What exactly are you looking for, Harrison?" "Innovation," he replied immediately. "Flexibility. A partner who understands that my business is growing and changing, and whose services can grow and change with it." Hartmann Shipping operates the same way they did 20 years ago. They have no vision for the future. Within 6 months, we had not only taken over all of Harrison's shipping needs, but had helped him expand into 3 new markets that Hartmann Shipping had told him were not profitable. Our innovative tracking systems, flexible scheduling, and competitive pricing saved him nearly 30% on his logistics costs while improving his delivery times dramatically. Harrison was just the beginning. By year 5, Atlas Global was not just competing with Hartmann Shipping. We were outpacing them in every meaningful metric. Our revenue growth was triple theirs. Our client satisfaction ratings were off the charts. Our employee retention rates reflected a company culture built on merit and mutual respect rather than entitlement and tradition. I had assembled a leadership team that looked like the future while Magnus and Victor clung to a board that looked like the past. While they were attending the same industry events they had been attending for decades, making the same speeches and telling the same stories, we were forging partnerships with companies that were reshaping global commerce. The shipping industry publications began to take notice. Atlas Global, the disruptor that nobody saw coming, read one headline. How Selene Hartmann is revolutionizing maritime logistics, read another. But the article that meant the most to me was titled, From Cast-Off to Competitor: The Rise of Atlas Global. It detailed my journey from being voted out of the family business to building a company that was threatening to overtake the very empire that had rejected me. When Magnus and Victor were quoted in that article, their bitterness was palpable. "Selene is trying to prove a point," Magnus had said. "But shipping is not about making statements. It is about steady, reliable service built on decades of experience." Victor's quote was even more telling. "She will learn that running a successful shipping company requires more than anger and ambition. It requires wisdom that comes only with time." I cut out that article and framed it in my office, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of how completely they had underestimated what their emotional niece was capable of achieving. Year 6 brought the moment I had been working toward since that devastating day in the Hartmann boardroom. We landed the Meridian Industries account, a massive manufacturing conglomerate that represented the single largest shipping contract in the industry. Hartmann Shipping had held that account for 12 years. They had considered it untouchable, a relationship so solid that they could count on it indefinitely. But relationships in business are like ships on the ocean. They require constant navigation and maintenance, or they drift away from their intended destination. Meridian's CEO, Rashida Okafor, had grown frustrated with Hartmann's lack of innovation and their inability to adapt to her company's evolving needs. When she reached out to Atlas Global for a consultation, I knew that this was the moment that would determine whether we remained a successful competitor or became the industry leader. I spent 3 months studying every aspect of Meridian's operations. I visited their manufacturing facilities in 7 countries. I interviewed their logistics managers, their warehouse supervisors, their transportation coordinators. I learned their business better than some of their own executives knew it. When I presented our proposal to Rashida and her board, I did not just offer them shipping services. I offered them a complete reimagining of how their global logistics could operate. Our technology platform would give them real-time visibility into every shipment, every inventory movement, every potential delay or disruption. Our predictive analytics would help them optimize their supply chain in ways that could save millions of dollars annually. Our global network of partners would provide them with flexibility and redundancy that could protect them from the kind of disruptions that had cost them dearly in recent years. But more than any technical specification or cost analysis, what won them over was something that Magnus and Victor had never understood: respect. I treated Meridian Industries as a partner, not just as a customer. I listened to their concerns, understood their challenges, and crafted solutions that addressed their specific needs rather than trying to force them into our standard service packages. When Rashida called to tell me that Atlas Global had won the contract, I felt a satisfaction deeper than any I had ever experienced. This was not just a business victory. This was validation of everything I had believed about how companies should operate, how clients should be treated, how innovation should drive progress. That night, I received a phone call that I had been expecting for months. Selene. Magnus' voice was strained, lacking all the arrogance that had characterized our last conversation. We need to talk. Do we? I replied calmly. I seem to remember you telling me that this conversation was over several years ago. Things have changed, he said, and I could hear the desperation creeping into his voice. The industry has changed. Our clients have changed. We need your help. The irony was so perfect that I almost laughed out loud. The men who had told me I was too emotional to understand business were now calling me because their own emotions, pride, stubbornness, contempt for change, had nearly destroyed the company they had fought so hard to keep from me. Help with what, exactly? Meridian was not the only account we lost this quarter, Magnus admitted. 3 of our largest clients have switched to competitors. 2 of them have switched to you. I let the silence stretch out, savoring every second of his discomfort. Our board is concerned about the company's direction, he continued. We think you might have some insights that could help us regain our competitive position. Insights. I repeated. Is that what you call them now? By year 7, Atlas Global had acquired not just 3 of Hartmann Shipping's largest accounts, but had established ourselves as the preferred logistics partner for the fastest-growing companies in 6 major industries. My uncles called it market disruption. I called it justice. The business media had begun to refer to what was happening as the Hartmann Wars, a corporate battle between the established shipping dynasty and the innovative upstart founded by the family's cast-off daughter. But I knew it was never really a war. Wars imply that both sides have a chance of victory. What was happening was more like a lesson being taught to students who had refused to learn when the instruction was offered gently. The lesson was simple. In business as in life, respect is earned through performance, not inherited through bloodlines. Last winter, 18 months after Magnus' desperate phone call, the Hartmann board made their final, humiliating attempt to lure me back into the family fold. The meeting was held in the same conference room where they had voted me out nearly a decade earlier. The mahogany table was the same, the leather chairs were the same, but everything else had changed completely. Magnus and Victor sat at that table like broken men. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the hollow-eyed desperation of people who had finally realized that their actions had consequences. The other board members looked even worse, if that was possible, like men who had bet everything on a horse race and watched their chosen animal collapse just before the finish line. Selene, Magnus began, his voice barely above a whisper. Thank you for coming. I said nothing. I simply sat in the chair they offered me and waited for them to explain why they thought I should care about their problems. The company is in trouble, Victor admitted, the words seeming to cause him physical pain. We have lost 60% of our major accounts over the past 3 years. Our revenue is down 47%. Our stock price has fallen to levels we have not seen since the recession. Still, I remained silent. This was their meeting, their crisis, their humiliation to endure. We know that we made mistakes, Magnus continued. We know that we did not treat you fairly, that we did not recognize your potential or value your contributions. We were wrong, Victor added. and those 3 words seemed to age him 10 years as he spoke them. Finally, Magnus delivered the line that I had been waiting to hear for nearly a decade. "Selene, you are the only one who can save us." I leaned back in my chair and smiled. Not a cruel smile or a mocking smile, but the satisfied smile of someone who had waited patiently for justice to arrive. "Funny," I said, my voice completely calm and controlled. "That is exactly what I told you 10 years ago." The proposal they offered was pathetic in its desperation. They wanted me to return as a consultant, to help them restructure their operations, modernize their systems, and win back the clients they had lost to more innovative competitors. In exchange, they were offering me a consulting fee that was less than what I made in profit from a single major shipment. "I appreciate the offer," I told them, standing to leave. "But I am afraid I cannot accept it." The relief that flickered across their faces was immediately replaced by confusion and renewed desperation. "However," I continued, "I do have a counter-proposal that you might find interesting." I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a folder containing documents that my legal team had been preparing for months. Atlas Global is prepared to acquire Hartmann Shipping in its entirety. The silence in the room was absolute. Magnus stared at me as if I had spoken in a foreign language. Victor's mouth opened and closed without producing any sound. "The offer is generous," I continued, "particularly considering the company's current financial position. It would allow the shareholders to recover most of their investment, preserve jobs for most of the employees, and ensure that the Hartmann name continues to exist in the maritime industry." "You want to buy us?" Magnus finally managed to ask. "I want to acquire the assets and client relationships that still have value," I clarified. The Hartmann name would become a subsidiary of Atlas Global, focusing on traditional shipping routes and established client relationships, while Atlas Global continues to lead the industry in innovation and expansion. Victor found his voice at last. "You cannot be serious." "I am completely serious," I replied. "This is not revenge, though I understand why you might see it that way. This is business. Pure and simple business." The negotiations took 6 months. Magnus and Victor fought every step of the way, trying to maintain some vestige of control, some fragment of the authority they had wielded so carelessly for so many years. But they were negotiating from a position of weakness, and we both knew it. Every month they delayed was another month of declining revenues, another quarter of disappointed shareholders, another year closer to bankruptcy. In the end, they signed the papers because they had no choice. The alternative was watching the company their grandfather had built dissolve completely, leaving nothing but debt and regret. The day the acquisition was finalized, I stood once again on the dock where I had stood as a young woman full of dreams and ambitions. But now, the ships bearing the Hartmann name sailed under my flag. The company that had rejected me answered to me. The legacy that they had tried to steal from me belonged to me completely. Magnus and Victor were given positions as regional directors, reporting to executives who reported to executives who reported to me. They were not humiliated or cast out as they had done to me. They were simply placed in positions that reflected their actual value to the organization. Today, the Hartmann name sits beneath mine on the corporate masthead. Their ships sail under my flag. Their board answers to me. But the most satisfying part of this entire journey is not the corporate hierarchy, or the financial success, or the industry recognition. The most satisfying part is knowing that I proved something that went far beyond business strategy or market dynamics. I proved that when you kick someone out of the family business, you might want to make sure they are not capable of building something better. I proved that underestimating people based on their gender, their age, their approach, or their ideas is not just morally wrong. It is strategically catastrophic. I proved that too emotional might actually mean too passionate to accept mediocrity. Most importantly, I proved to myself that the fire in my veins was not a weakness to be controlled, but a power to be unleashed. They kicked me out of the family business, thinking they were protecting their legacy. Instead, they created their own replacement. I built a rival empire, and then I made them part of it. The harbor lights still twinkle like fallen stars on the dark water. But now they illuminate ships that carry my name, my vision, my unbreakable determination to never again let anyone tell me what I am too emotional to achieve. This is my story. This is my victory. This is what happens when you bet against someone who refuses to lose. If this story of determination and triumph inspired you, please subscribe to our channel for more incredible tales of people who turned their greatest setbacks into their most powerful comebacks. Your support means the world to us, and there are so many more amazing stories waiting to be shared with you.